Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Agile Meridian's Agile Short Series. Today, we're talking about a topic that actually I wrote about on a blog some time ago and recently, a couple of weeks ago, on our Agile Meridian LinkedIn site. And it talks about an adaptive and a blended approach, and it's really about towards learning period. We talk about it a lot specifically in terms of learning lean and agile, organizational design, a lot of systems thinking stuff, but it really works for modern learning as a whole. And what we thought we would do today is talk about, and I wanted to get from my partners at Agile Meridian, I wanted to get some experiences that they had, have them talk about what this means to them. What does it mean to have an adaptive and a blended approach towards learning, and how does it help organizations? And then give them maybe an example of some of those successes that they've seen in using this method or this approach towards learning and towards integrating and injecting learning into an organization so that it can be utilized and captured, and the value and the retention can be immediately seen and started to be realized. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Kumar. Welcome, Jolly. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
So let's talk about this a little bit. Jolly, we'll go ahead and start with you. Talk about some of the what does this mean to you? This adaptive blended approach, and what is it? And what have you seen in terms of approaches that you've seen or even used with other organizations in terms of leveraging an adaptive and blended approach towards adopting something new or towards bringing in something new?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the first things that I always talk about with my clients, with my friends, with people who I work with, is the first principle of Kanban. By now, everyone knows that I'm a bit of a Kanban fanboy. But the first principle is start where you are, right? It doesn't say go from 0 to 10 in a month or in 3 months, in 6 months. It says start where you are and figure out an adaptive approach that works for you, given your context, right? And the most useful approach that I have seen, and the most workable approach I have seen, is to have like an experimental mindset. So run some experiments, run some small experiments, see what it gets you, learn from it, maybe measure it if there are some metrics associated with it, and then adapt your approach continuously. Have that continuous improvement going with an experimental mindset behind it. So it requires a few things to be in place. It requires some level of safety, so that the people are free to experiment and don't get judged by some failures that they may have. And also that learning mindset of continuously learning along the way.
Absolutely. So it sounds like environment has a lot to do with this, right? An environment that promotes this continuous learning, the ability to experiment, starting situationally and contextually where you are, and not just dropping what you've done or starting right in, but bringing that forward with you as part of what you're doing and blending that in to the new, right? Blending where you are and what you've done and carrying that forward as part of it. That's excellent. Jolly, or I'm sorry, Kumar. I got my eyes jumping around the screen a little bit. What
look like, I know,
that you've seen out there of this as well?
I echo what Jolly was saying earlier. It's about starting where you are and applying, practicing that adaptive muscle, right? It's not an easy thing to do in most organizations. Things are fairly rigid, and things work a certain way, right? Things just don't work that way around here. And that's often what I hear as a coach going into an organization. Well, Kumar, you just don't understand. That's just not how it works around here. And so that's through, I'd say, it's the culture, right? It doesn't allow for that safety that Jolly, that you were talking about, safety to experiment. I forget, what was your question?
So what are some examples, or an example that you've seen similar to what Jolly's seen, in terms of a way that an organization you've worked with in the past has successfully been able to blend and adapt where they were and their new learnings or the change that they wanted to implement? How did that happen, and exactly what did they do? Because I think you're right, the environment is key in this, right? And how did they impact that environment, and what were the results that you saw from that?
Yeah, I'll just share an experience with a former client, and I was working with a division and their leadership team. And it's, an organization that's been around for probably 100 years. And so they were told, hey, we're going to go Agile, and here's your coach. And the first thing they did was say, okay, Kumar, I guess you're going to help us implement Jira and the tools to track the work that we do. And, because that's what they knew, right? And so through the course of conversation over the next several weeks, it was more about, hey, what's in your way? What are the blockers? What are the challenges that you face? And instilling in them that experimentation mindset, to be open to change, to be open to trying some things that fit within the culture, within the climate in that department, that division, really, that they could start to experiment with, right? So being adaptable, blending approaches from different frameworks. It's not about Scrum necessarily that was going to work for them, because this division was more an operations group, right? They were business facing, customer facing, and so for them, Scrum wouldn't work anyway. So it was really about understanding the situation on the ground for them, their challenges, their opportunities for growth, and then having them think through, well, what would work better? What are the constraints that are in front of us? And how can we use approaches from different frameworks, perhaps, or just things we already know that we've just forgotten because the culture has been less than supportive of trying new things. And I will say that they I won't say who it was, but they made some incredible strides in adopting some patterns from Xscale, for instance, things like leadership as a service and the directly responsible individuals, adapting those patterns to the way they led and managed and supported their teams. And they realized some really impressive business outcomes in terms of their process time for one of their operational events went down by 20%, which is significant, right? Because it had an impact on both their upstream, the people that were feeding them information, and of course downstream, the people that were consuming information. 20% reduction meant that they were now starting to clamor for more stuff upstream, like, hey, we're ready, give us more. And those people that were upstream was like, hey, what's going on with you guys? How could you possibly be ready so soon? Right. So it had some real effects on them. So it was that adaptive, blended approach that they used that allowed them to realize those types of gains. Very much a lean mindset, right? What Jolly, what you were talking about.
Yeah. And just to add one more example to that list. I was working with a client a couple of years ago. They started off this program as a couple of teams, and then they started growing, like to 3 teams, to 4 teams, and before you know it, they had like a big program of 6 teams, and they were finding it difficult to coordinate across and to solve dependencies, impediments across these 6 teams, just beyond a scrum or scrums. And one of the first instincts is, okay, let's go to a bigger scaling framework. We'll take any of the examples, like SAFe, DAD, LESS, any of the scaling frameworks. But what they decided to do was before going to a 3-month planning window or more, what they decided to experiment with and was to have a 1-month planning window. It's more than 2 weeks, which is a sprint. It is less than 3 months, which is way too long. And that really worked for them. And they tried that experiment for a quarter. So they did 3 of those plannings, and it found out that they really worked across those 6 teams, and they still continue it. And it's been 2 or 3 years since, which is pretty awesome. So it's not always necessary that you take that big shift. Try small shifts and see where you get to.
That's excellent, and I think that the ability to experiment like that and having that support from whatever organizational entity they were working with was really critical. To your point, that goes right back to blended and adaptable, right? Because they took current state and realized, hey, 3 months is too long, 1 month or 1 week is too short, whatever, and that's the case. And so how would you if you were talking to someone, they said, I want to be able to build this environment, to have at least a runway, some time to be able to put together an approach for us to experiment, to be able to try these things in a risk-conscious way, and with measurables around it, to be able to show, Kumar, I loved your examples because they were able to show measurable improvement, right? And they could show when they started to see that measurable improvement. That says a lot inside an organization when someone inside the organization is doing it versus when someone like us from outside the organization is saying someone did it, but it hasn't happened there yet. I think that's really critical. When you think about someone that's starting on this a journey to try to use an adaptive or blended approach, or maybe they're in the middle of something now, what would you tell them that they really need to do in order to get that environmental space and that time to build the runway to start to launch whatever it is that they want to launch, the new types of ways of working or approaches?
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest constraint, bottleneck, and changing mindsets are the meeting culture that drives everything in corporate America, in the corporate world in general. And I think it's been exacerbated by this pandemic that we're in. It's like we're moving from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting every day, all day, with no breaks or very few breaks. Just enough time to maybe get your bios refreshed, and that's about it. So I think the first step, at least what I've seen work, is to inventory all the meetings that people go to, and try to capture time back. Right? Does everyone need to go to every meeting? And that just that inventorying. So for a leadership team, if they find that they're going to lots of common meetings and they designate a DRI from their group to represent them, there's a time saving right there. And on average, I've seen leadership teams save 10 to 15 hours a week. It's huge. They're gaining half their week back.
Yes.
It's a huge impact, and that's what we did with this team at this client. That's what we try to do. At least I try to do, and I know you guys do too, with your clients. Is, hey, where can we find time where you're not in meetings all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to that, and this might be a little bit more abstract than the very tangible example that Kumar gave. We talked about safety before. The fact that the team or people need to be safe to experiment and figure out what works for them in a blended approach. What goes along with that safety is trust, right? I have this catchphrase kind of coin, which is, trust your team. If you cannot trust your team, go build a team you can trust, right? Mm-hmm. So as a leader, most leaders are in that position. If you will have a team, and if you cannot trust them, you are directly responsible to go and build one you can actually trust. Those kind of go hand in hand. Build the trust, build the safety around it, and then you have an environment where these kind of incremental, iterative, and experimental approaches can actually work.
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. And to your point, having the psychological safety and the political safety to be able to try things out, and having time to not only learn but to adopt the learnings themselves. Mm-hmm. It takes energy, it takes time. So I think those are two great places to focus in helping folks figure out, do you have these things, or can you find these things? Can you get that structure around there? Because if you are, you've got the building blocks of the starting of being able to execute in an adaptable and blended way towards your change management, towards your learning, towards innovation, or whatever it is you want to do. So I think it's great. Any last comments from either one of you on this topic before we leave for today?
I have one, and that's just as we started talking about this adaptive blended approach to achieving results and change and things. The one thing that kept coming back to me was Peter Senge's 5 disciplines of what does he call it? 5 disciplines of a learning organization, right? So if we want to create a learning organization, what do we need to focus on? And in his book about this. He talks about personal mastery, right? So being able to really be the best that you can be at whatever it is that you do, right? Whether it's leading or doing, either way, right? So mental models, being aware of your mental models, being aware of others' mental models and how they can impact how you think about certain things, building a shared vision, right? So to your point, Jolly, about if you can't trust your team, go build a team you can trust. Part of that is having that shared vision. Team learning, right? How does a team learn and grow together? Again, back to your point, Jolly, about sort of those small experiments, right? Teams learn through experimentation and safety. And so as leaders, I think being able to provide that environment and culture for team learning is hugely important. And then finally, the final discipline that ties them all together is systems thinking, right? It integrates these other four. And I think this model really encapsulates this adaptive blended approach to learning, the flow of learning. At least for me, it does. So that's my final thought.
Fantastic.
I echo whatever Kumar said.
Mic drop, boom.
There you go. Exactly. Fist bump across the country. Right? Well, this has been great. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Jolly and Kumar, for your input. That's great advice. Some great places to start. Some things to think about. Do we have these two things in place? Do we have others in place? And feel free to check out the blog and then start to look into those things like those 5 habits, those 5 disciplines of learning organization, right? So once again, thanks again for Agile Meridian. I'm Mike Jebber, Jolly and Kumar. Have a great day, everyone.
See you all in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.